How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me once again. Tonight, we have the inestimable Clifton Duncan with the velvety voice. I'm very excited to talk to him once again. I had a great time with him when he was on Timcast IRL with us a while ago. He is a kind of nuanced fellow, formerly from New York, if I understand correctly, who saw a lot of pressure during the pandemic and continues to have very strongly held views since then. So, Clifton, how are you doing? What have you been up to?
Oh, hey, Lydia, it's really great to meet you. I can't.
Making me a liar already. Thanks a lot.
I've never been referred to as inestimable before. That's a new one.
There you go.
I guess it's one of the nicer terms. I've been sitting in front of this computer all day, and I feel like my brain is kind of mush, but hopefully we'll be able to find something entertaining for people to latch on to. But I lived in the city formerly known as New York for almost a decade and a half. I'm in Atlanta now, but I was an up and coming actor, and then the pandemic hit, and the entire industry decided to lose its collective mind, which I think was more of an extension of how Trump derangement syndrome just completely destroyed them. But long story short, I guess I sort of, I don't know. It's like I'm not someone who decided I'm going to go into content creation and become a mediocre influencer or as I say, a mediocre Twitter personality. I just really began saying what I think, and it's funny because I had like two Twitter profiles for a long time. One was my public Twitter, which was like, "Hey guys, I'm in a show. Why don't you come and see me in the show?" Which no one cared about. And then I had my anonymous account where I would give my true opinions and follow all the dangerous wrong thinkers. And in 2020, when it was a combination of the pandemic and also all of the social unrest, shall we say, that unfolded in the wake of George Floyd's death. And, I just saw these sweeping societal changes that were just coming in really, really quickly. And I decided to just start saying what I think. And I met some of the right people, one of them being Carrie Smith, just at literally a chance meeting. She happened to be driving, I think, to Texas with her then fiance, now husband. And we met at a Panera Bread and chatted for like an hour or so.
Wow.
Yeah. And just kind of from there, I ended up on, I still don't know how it happened. I just ended up on different shows and like Timcast and Trigonometry and stuff like that. And just kept tweeting my thoughts, and my following grew. And then eventually I started a podcast, a Clifton Duncan podcast. And that is taking on a life of its own, and a YouTube channel. So, in a few short years, I went from nobody really caring. I spent 10 years as an actor, no one really cared. And then, I become more famous for not being able to act than I ever achieved as an actor. But, I'm not motivated by fame anyway, obviously. So that's sort of where I am now, I guess. It's the long and the short of it.
That's awesome. So that sounds a little bit like a silver lining. Do you think the pandemic made people thirstier for the truth?
Yes and no. Sorry, I'm going to be a
No, I think you're right. Go on.
Because yes, in the sense that there are people who, and this is a legit silver lining, I think. And before we began recording, I was talking about this group of parents that this chat group. I mean, I'm actually in multiple chat groups now on Twitter. I can't keep up with all of them, but two of them include, just regular people who were like parents, primarily moms, but you're talking about people who are like, Bernie supporters from San Francisco and Liz Warren supporters, Biden voters, and they've gone from that to now they're talking about I don't know what I can say on YouTube, but now they're talking about the environment, shall we say, and how the climate issue let's just say that those who have had their minds sort of eyes opened by the pandemic, they are now skilled in pattern recognition for other
Indeed.
issues.
Yes.
They've become very they've had their eyes opened. So yes, in the sense that now people are they're hungry for the truth because a lot of people who were normies before
Hmm.
have seen the way that the last few years have been managed, and now they understand the lies. Um, but no, in the sense that there's still I mean, before we got on, I said Marxism is a religion of peace, or leftism, whatever you want to say. But there's these people who are still cocooned in this bubble where nothing can penetrate. I mean, there was an article that I think there was a New York Times article that was tweeted out by somebody about basically how young people really aren't doing well in the wake of the past few years, and some dumb woman, a painter, which stupid artist. I mean, Scott Adams did this like hashtag artist thing,
Yeah, he does not
and
like them.
well, because they're so dumb. I say this as an artist myself. They're just dumb, Lydia. I mean, and she tweeted out, all because of Republicans. And first of all, it's not only it's the opposite of reality, but also if that's your first response to the news of children suffering mentally to the point where they're harming themselves in the ultimate way, if that's your first response to this, then that's my dryer. Sorry.
No
If that's your first response to this, then I mean, there's no helping you. And to this day, there's still people who just they're stuck in that bubble. And as we were kind of talking about earlier before we began recording, I mean, it's not confined to the insanity is not confined to one end of the spectrum whatsoever.
Right. That's definitely true. So I wanted to ask you, since you brought up the topic of artists, and this is something I'd heard Scott Adams talk about, and it's interesting for him, especially because he's also an artist. What is it about art, you think, that makes people kind of lose touch with reality? It seems like maybe that's the nicest way to say it.
Well, it's not I don't think it's being an artist in and of itself. I will say that if I take more of a Petersonian approach to it, Jordan Peterson, I think I like the way that he breaks it down on a psychological level. You'd have people who are more conservative minded, people who are more liberal minded. This is why I cling to the label of being a liberal, because in terms of my sort of openness, my, my constitutional makeup, um, but it's just strange to me because I think part of it is that the arts in general they become very left wing, partly because of sheer practicality. And what I mean by that is that when you're talking about more conservative minded people, they tend to live more within the norms of life and society, i.e., holding down a job, taking care of a family, financial planning, all these kinds of things. So just very practical sort of things. And
Sure.
you if you're in a profession where, I mean, if you're an actor specifically, unemployment is the rule, not the exception.
Right.
And you don't know oftentimes where your next job is coming from. I mean, even if you do get a job, you could be in a long running or an open-ended run in a Broadway show, and it could close the next week if it's not doing well. So you're really a glorified independent contractor. You don't often know. I mean, there's no stability in that. How do you raise a family on that? And I was actually thinking about this yesterday. It's I mean, it makes dating and relationships difficult. I mean, if you're a man, oftentimes as an actor and as an artist, if your income isn't stable and your finances aren't stable, well, it doesn't really make you an attractive marriage partner now, does it? And then on the other hand, if you're a woman, and I see this happen a lot to my actress friends, and it happens in comedy as well, is that you get a gig and you disappear off the face of the planet for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. You're traveling all over the place, and the kind of men that want to get married, you're probably going to be more conservative leaning men in general, and a lot of times women who are artists or in these fields, they run into these men who say, well, I just can you be home more? I don't really want you traveling that much. So, and then add kids to the mix, and that makes it even more difficult. So just in terms of sheer practicality, I think a lot of people who are more conservative leaning don't go into these fields just because it's so haphazard and and so unstable. But on top of that, you have just this complete hostility towards people who are even independent or moderate in their views, increasingly so.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I remember in the run up to the 2016 election, maybe was it? I forgot, but someone was I was rehearsing for a concert that I was going to be in, and we are on a break, and this guy, you know, is ranting about some nonsense, and he goes, and then there's these brain dead independents, and I'm like, so you're indirectly, because at that point I'd already unregistered from the Democrat Party,
Mm.
and so I'm like, you're indirectly insulting me for not blindly swallowing what the Democrats or what the news says. And you have a lot of actors who are, who know for a fact that if their political views ever get out, and there's a great interview that Andrew Breitbart gave in like 2009 or something for the Hoover Institution, where he talks about this. There are plenty of I won't say plenty, but there are more than you think, conservative people or conservative minded people or people who just aren't, crazy woke a-holes in these
Mm-hmm.
in this industry, but they know for a fact that if they ever say anything or speak up, it's going to damage their career prospects. So that's sort of a long-winded way to say that I think one of the reasons that artists are sort of stuck in this mindset is, one, people who have different points of view tend to stay away from these industries. Two, people who are more conservative minded, um, I find they tend to be a little bit more rigid in their beliefs, and which makes them good at setting boundaries and that kind of thing, which leftists aren't that good at. But it's not so useful in terms of creative pursuits. And then lastly, it's just it's kind of a cult.
Interesting. What makes you say that?
Well, because you literally, and I'm speaking as an actor specifically, you literally have to shut off your thinking faculties in order to belong, um, in order to have a career. I mean, do you think, I don't know what Michael B. Jordan or Jonathan Majors thinks about climate or feminism, but there's no way they're ever going to step out of line on those issues
Hmm.
because they want to maintain what they have. You notice someone like Denzel Washington, I swear up and down, there's no way he's not conservative. The things that he says, he's a family man. He believes in God. The way he talks about his work, he has a work ethic, so there's that as well. But he, he talks about how important the family is and his belief in God. I mean, it's obvious, but he's not going to come out and say that. Um, there's other actors like Tom Selleck is another one who infamously clashed with Rosie O'Donnell over the issue of firearms. There's an entire group actually, and I don't even know if I can name their name, where it's invite only, but
Hmm.
it's a bunch of conservative actors where it's like Fight Club, and they say you can't ever talk about it because um, the people within the Fight Club know that it could damage their career prospects by speaking out on this. And these are the people, by the way, who talk about McCarthyism all day long. I call them neo-McCarthyists.
Hmm. Yeah, so it sounds to me like they're afraid, understandably, honestly. I actually said this about doctors who, during the pandemic, were afraid to speak up because I said these doctors have gone to school for 10 years. They have massive amounts of student loan debt, and they can lose their license at any time, especially in places like California, where they were passing this bill saying if you speak wrong about the pandemic, we are going to come after you. And I was like, that's terrifying. And that's your entire way of life. And you've devoted years and years, possibly up to like a decade of your time to make this happen. So for them to just be like, well, we could just take your license is an incredible threat. So it's like, that doesn't make it right. I'm just saying, I understand. And it's kind of similar with actors, but at the same time, I feel like it would be really hard as an actor to be unable to use your influence to kind of encourage people to see things the way you do. Do you have I know you may not be willing to divulge any of this stuff because it is kind of personal, but if you're familiar with like conservative actors and actresses, do you know if there are people who are frustrated by not being able to use their positions to kind of further their actual viewpoints instead of just towing the party line?
Um, no, not really. But I mean, I recently did podcasts with a couple of, like, Antonio Sabato Jr. is one. Dean Cain is another one. People
Yeah.
who don't remember, Dean Cain played Superman and Lois and Clark, and he's a really, really great all around great guy. Um, and they're both really unapologetic and open with their views, but they also acknowledge that, I mean, I know Antonio, he's gone on the record saying that he thinks that he was, uh, his career was damaged by his support for Trump.
Hmm.
Dean Cain, you know, Dean Cain is still, working and doing stuff and making his own movies, but he said, yeah, it might have damaged my career, but I wouldn't have it any other way. But both of those men are interesting because they have things in their lives outside of acting. So, they'll talk about religion or family or something like that. So it's not as important to them. But they're also, they're both, I think they're both over 50, and they're both kind of established in a way. But if you're talking about someone who's like a Timothy Chalfant's age or something, I don't know of any young people who can, like a Matthew McConaughey can go on Jordan Peterson's podcast or Joe Rogan's
Right.
podcast. He's won his Oscars already, but for people who haven't been established, it's just, I mean, they know. I mean, I know for myself, and again, I don't consider myself to be a particularly conservative person, but I'm also not someone who's going to, who buys into toxic masculinity and that everything is sexist. And I never have used my race I just don't pull the race card, and I have no interest in that. I guess I'm politically white, as Nicole Hannah Jones would say,
Mm.
that dumbass. But I just have no interest in it. And then after Trump got elected, people became even more radicalized, and things became even more, just more intense. And it's difficult because there's a lot of, it's an industry where I call it an R&R industry. It's heavily built on relationships and reputation. And that's what they mean when they say it's at a certain point, everyone has talent. Although, I mean, not everyone, but just about everyone has talent. And it's really about who you know. And it's not only that about who you know, it's what they know about you.
Mm.
And, I mean, there was one theater in Washington, D.C., which I really love, that was, we were building a relationship together. And apparently the head honcho there was like, we followed each other on Facebook, and he's like, I want to see what I'm getting into. And I remember years later after that, actually, when a new head honcho stepped in, and they actually called in, they had a meeting in New York City, and they called in a bunch of actors that the theater was familiar with. And this was around just after, I think, the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation. And it was so funny because you could see the kind of difference in mindset, because everyone else in that circle, and I shit you not, everyone else in the circle was talking about politics. And the other guy who wasn't white was talking about, I'm brown and people don't see me, yada yada yada. And these women were like, victim, victim, victim. And I was like, I'm good at this, this, and this, and I want to work on this kind of role, and
That's
I don't
right.
really care about the I said, I don't really care about my race. I just want to work on great roles in classic plays and challenge myself as an actor. And and this, the other brown guy was like, I mean, yeah, but like, and this is a guy who, he's well dressed, he's very well spoken. You can tell he's educated, and he's done well for himself. He's a gay guy married to another white man, and he's talking about, yeah, you could say it's just a role, but like, and he just goes on. And there was another guy who was talking about, just beating his chest about how proud he is to be an activist, if you can think of a more ridiculous phrase.
Wait.
Another guy was like literally shaking with rage because, I don't know what kind of world I'm bringing my daughter into. I'm just so angry right now. And, and I remember I chilled the room by paraphrasing Michael Jordan. I said, well, because this theater's in DC, right?
Oh boy.
And, I was just there, and, and it's a really great theater town, actually, but you're right there. And, I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg came to see a show that I was in. You have people
wow.
who they'll come to these shows. Right. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to really kind of bring people together. You're in the center of American political power, right? And but I chilled this room by paraphrasing Michael Jordan and saying, well, Republicans buy tickets too. And people weren't trying to hear that. They just weren't trying to hear it. So there's this immense, social pressure, this ideological pressure to kind of conform and keep your mouth quiet because everyone else in the room thinks differently and thinks one way. And are you really going to? And here's how dumb these people are, right? Like when Obama was president, I was doing a show off Broadway, and my criticisms of him at the time were inspired and informed by journalists and writers and thinkers who were to the left of him. Like there's a website called Black Agenda Report, which is a very left, black progressive website. Glenn Greenwald is another one that I paid attention to, who hasn't changed at all, by the way. And so now, but people hate him on the left now for, it's very obvious why, because they've gone nuts. But even back then, people were like, is Clifton a Republican? I'm like, you know what I mean? And it's just it's so dumb. So, but you don't want to be considered difficult. You don't want to be like the odd person out. And in an environment where words are violence, and where, you can't even say that sexual dimorphism is real because that then you're talking about certain sexual minorities being, erased. Or if you decide that, I'm not going to post a black square on my Instagram because it doesn't really do anything and it's dumb, then you're a Nazi. That's the kind of environment that you're in, that you're swimming in all day. And, and there's more incentive to be quiet because when you are quiet and you're moving and your career is moving along, then guess what? You're starring on Broadway, making thousands of dollars a week, or you're a series regular on a network television show, making 30 grand per week minimum. And everyone's telling you you're pretty and that you're special and your face is everywhere, and you're red hot and you're getting jobs, and you're not locked down in an office somewhere. And so there's way more incentive to just kind of go with the flow and than to rock the boat at all.
Yeah.
And the result is that you get a bunch of closed-minded, ridiculous processes. And I think a lot of stale work comes out of it that people aren't really interested in.
Yeah, so I see here that your pinned tweet is from a few years ago, and you're talking about diverse characters and how audiences don't hate them. You say, what they hate is being slammed as bigots for rejecting bad work from pretentious, unskilled activists posing as writers. Interesting. If the demography of your characters becomes more important than the story, your story will probably suck. That sounds very similar to what you're just saying there. It sounds to me like the way they operate is the perfect recipe for an absolutely impenetrable bubble. And I feel like that's what we're seeing. And I think that the concept of the stale work is really the result of that. Do you see this going away anytime soon as these movies fail again and again? Do you think the message is going to get through?
I think it's getting through in some ways. In the theater, and people don't really care about theater, which I think is kind of their fault, honestly. But I always say that as bad as it is in Hollywood, it's about 10 times worse in New York and in theater.
Really?
And oh yeah, they're super woke. It's really unbelievable. It's insufferable. But there do seem to be changes happening in Hollywood to an extent. I just had a conversation with a guy named Kamran Pasha, who's always a great guest to have on. He's a screenwriter, Emmy-nominated screenwriter, who has great insight into the industry. And right now we're talking about, you mentioned the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I can't think of a more stark example of how this ideology completely fails. Then, people were going along with the Marvel ride, including myself, for over a decade, for 12 years. And these movies, by the end of the first 4 phases, were making $1 billion a piece. Even the bad movies. Captain Marvel sucked.
Yes.
And Black Panther wasn't good. Let's just say it. Black Panther was not good. I don't know why it made $1 billion. I'm glad it did. But it was like okay at best. But they were printing money with these movies, and then what happened right after that? It just dropped off a cliff, and
Mhm.
but the person who was responsible for that got fired from Disney. Yeah, and it looks like they brought Bob Iger back, who was kind
Right.
of responsible for these problems in the first place. But it seems like they're making some staffing changes. They're laying people off. Um, so things might be changing there. I know at Warner Brothers Studio, a guy named David Zaslav has kind of stepped in, and he's the guy that notoriously just canned the Batwoman movie that was supposed to come out, which apparently was just so awful that he canned it. He canned. I mean, they had it shot. It was going to be released.
That's
Um,
right. They'd
right. Yeah.
started it and he just was like, "No, this is
Yeah.
not going to work."
They
Wow,
they
that was
they canned
brave.
it. But what's also interesting as well, though, is that, and this came up in my conversation with Kamran as well, is that now we're in the age of the internet, and we have all these content creators and influencers, like Critical Drinker and Nerdrotics and other people who are a voice for the fans, and they're a voice for the general audience. And what you find is that the general audience increasingly, and this references my tweet, they're tired of being called Nazis and fascists and bigots and istophobes, as they say, because they recognize that these movies are bad, and they know why they're bad. I mean, you look at the comments sections on these videos, and a lot of times the commenters are smarter than the people making the movies. A lot of times these commentators have put more thought into these stories than the people making these movies. And in cases like the Last Jedi, for instance, the Star Wars movie,
Yeah.
I mean, it's as if Rian Johnson, the director, went out of his way to piss off fans. And when you're talking about it's one thing if you're talking about some like indie art house flick or something, but this is Star Wars. You know what I mean? This is a beloved franchise, a multi-generational franchise, and you're telling everyone that the past is dead and kill it, and you have Luke Skywalker, drinking milk from some space moose titty.
So
You know,
weird. So
like
weird.
nobody wants to see that. Like how disrespectful to these characters, and
Yeah.
and so and correspondingly, these movies, I mean, they make decent money, but nowhere near as much as The Force Awakens made. So it's so maybe things are changing, and slowly but surely. But like I said, it seems like people inside the system, there's just way more incentive to just kind of go along with everything. Oh, lost a light. Go along with everything than there is to to kind of rock the boat a little bit. But
Hmm.
who knows?
Yeah, so I think you might be right. And it's interesting that you mentioned money because this was something that I was thinking about earlier today. Because just over the course of the last week or so, we've seen Bud Light, the beer company, Anheuser-Busch. We've seen Nike Women's. We've seen Jack Daniels. And there was one other company I can't currently remember that all of them, oh, the CMT, the Country Music Awards,
Mm.
all of them have dived fully into not just like LGBTQ stuff, but like fully into drag queen stuff. We had Build a Bear with their drag queen bear, and it's right on the front page. And this is a company that typically sells to kids. And I'm just forced to ask, do they actually care about the people they're selling to, or does money not matter to them anymore? Do you think it's possible that these people no longer are motivated by money?
Well, again, yes and no. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah.
Well, people talk about ESG, for instance, and I don't even know what it stands for, but it's like something social goal, something like that.
Yeah.
But there was a really interesting event the other day where Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, the returning CEO of Disney, was on a shareholder call, like their annual shareholder call or something like that. And you had these people who were calling in, investors who really took him and Disney to task for weighing in on these issues. And Bob Iger's answer really intrigued me because on one hand, it was very smart. He's obviously a very smart man, a very articulate man, and a very politically savvy person. And he basically said, because someone straight up said, Disney has no longer become they're no longer a family friendly brand because they're leaning into these issues, particularly for sexual minorities and so on. And he basically compared what Disney is doing to the civil rights movement. And so on one hand, while he's making these staffing changes, and they recognize, I mean Disney, I mean they're cutting costs, they're outsourcing some of their IPs to different to different franchise, some of their content, I should say, to different um, to other people, and their Disney Plus has not really worked out for them, their streaming service, and so they recognize that, and they're making changes in response to that. But at the same time, I think they're in this world, they're in this bubble where uh, where they are on this crusade, this this Marxist crusade. As I said before, Marxism is a religion of peace.
Yeah.
Um, and they think that they are working on behalf to advance these social causes, and it's very difficult because I have sympathy for it. For instance, that film Bros, which came out
Oh, yeah.
a while ago, this romantic comedy, and I don't love the fact that it failed so spectacularly. Whether or not it's a good or bad movie, because if you are someone who is, involved in the movie and you happen to be gay, like how can you not take the wholesale rejection of that film as a slap in the face, as like society saying, we don't want you around and we
Yeah.
hate you because you're gay. At the same time, why would you release this film and think that it was going to have widespread appeal? Um, there was a couple of films around 2010 or so, um, which I always use the example of. One was called uh, Pariah. The other was called Gun Hill Road. Pariah is this coming of age story about a black lesbian teenager in New York City, and Gun Hill Road is about this 16-year-old Latino boy who's transitioning into a girl.
Hmm.
And what stands out about those films to me is that they're, like I said, they're coming of age stories, but they deal with family issues, friends, all these social stuff that everyone deals with.
Right.
I mean, I remember specifically Gun Hill Road. This kid attracts this boy, and they kind of form a relationship, and they're navigating like it's not only the sort of weird kind of sexual stuff that we had to navigate when we were kind of stepping into those waters. There's that and the added layer of, well, I'm having surgery and getting these hormones and da 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 da.
Right.
So it takes this, but these are independent films. You know what I mean? Like so if you're at what's it called, Landmark Sunshine, what's it called, or the Angelica Film Center or the IFC in downtown Manhattan, and you see these films, which is where I saw them, then that's one thing. But if you're expecting like a big box office blockbuster with these sort of niche issues, and I think they're good movies, then that's something else altogether. And it's tough. I feel mixed about it and torn, because I do feel like the more that the quote unquote progressive side pushes these issues, the more radicalized the right is becoming. And so, and I don't know how we get out of this cycle, because it's getting quite ugly now.
Yeah, I don't like it. But I think you touched on a possible solution that I think they could really go with, because as you mentioned with like Gun Hill Road, it wasn't just about the identity of the character. These were universal things that we all struggle with, like family issue and some of the different dynamics of building a relationship when you're in your teens and being young and inexperienced at life. I think that if the left were to operate in truly good faith, and instead of trying to cram down this ham-handed ideology on everyone, forcing acceptance and tolerance, they would try to phrase this in a way that was more about the individual than about the victim class and the victim group. I think that once you start to view, for example, the character in Gun Hill Road as an individual just having a really hard time, I think it's very difficult for anyone in any political camp not to look at that and be compassionate. Whereas if you take something like Bros and you're like, this is what it is, it's way over the top, you're going to love it. Not only are you going to tolerate it, you're going to celebrate it because this is what we're telling you you need to do now. People aren't going to resonate with that. And if anything, that's going to make people less likely to be as accepting of that community. Now, I don't know how it is lately, but from the statistics that I was reading from 2019, younger generations are being less tolerant and less accepting of the LGBTQ rainbow. And I had to stop when I read that because I was like, this tracks pretty much perfectly because we know that young people are naturally, this knee jerk response to being told what to do. Unfortunately, now in 2023, it seems like a lot of them have kind of bought into it and they think that it is actually countercultural to engage with this really strong peer pressure we're seeing at schools, where we're seeing whole classes of like fifth grader girls wanting to transition to the opposite gender. And so, what I wanted to ask you, as somebody who kind of works in that field, what do you think of this trend of all of the individual actors jumping on board with like coming out as pansexual and bisexual and all this other stuff? Do you think this is something that will get worse, or is it just like a rite of passage? Will everyone have it at some point? How do you feel about that?
Well, for the record, I was in this field. I've been purged for a variety of reasons, but
That's right, I guess.
but I mean, it's just, and again, it's why I'm torn, right? Because if you're talking about the arts in general or entertainment specifically, it is a magnet for people who are more socially outcast. I mean, I was like, oh, look, a bunch of weirdos like me. It turns out that I wasn't quite as weird. I wasn't weird enough. But, so especially if you talk about musical theater and Broadway, I mean, there's gays everywhere. But it's interesting because even a few years ago, I mean, one of my roommates was gay, as a matter of fact, or I'd be sharing a dressing room with a bunch of other gay guys, and they didn't understand any of the like the non-binary, genderqueer kind of stuff. They were trying to be polite about it, but they didn't really, no one was really understanding it. It just seems to me, in a lot of ways, it just seems to be a trend, and people trying to fit in. And again, if you're talking about the arts and entertainment world, I mean, frankly, it's a bunch of insecure and damaged people, and I don't exclude or accept myself, EXCEPT, from this, from that group. There's a great joke in the musical Chicago, which is a great film, by the way, with Renee Zellweger and Richard Gere and Queen Latifah. It's a really great, really great adaptation. But there's a great joke in that film about, our mothers never loved us enough. That's why we're in show business.
Wow.
I mean, and it's true in a lot of ways. And again, all the weird kind of theater kids in your school, those are the next movie stars and producers and directors and writers. So there's already this sense that you're already on the outskirts of society. If you're like a default liberal, you already have this idea that you are for the oppressed people, and that you stand by marginalized and vulnerable groups. And I tweeted out the other day that trans is the new black, because that's literally what they're doing right now. They're trying to link it up. They're trying to have these echoes of like the civil rights movement of the 60s. And the funny thing about that is that black people they're let's just say they tend to lean more socially conservative on these kinds of issues than progressives seem to understand. And but I think there's a combination again of factors of people who are already kind of on the outskirts of society. We're already kind of weirdos. And again, I lean back towards this sort of psychological perspective of being kind of more open and I guess more permeable in terms of interests and personality, and really compassion. I'll say that much. And you feel for people, and so people want to belong. And if people are perceived as outcasts, and people are perceived as victims of society at large, because again, if you have this sort of Marxist left wing totalizing view, where all these oppressive systems are at work and structures in place to, and everything is white supremacist, European, cis, heteronormative, patriarchal, so on and so forth, then anyone who seems to be outside of that, that you perceive to be outside of that, you're going to be on their side. And, gay marriage was passed. And it's funny because I was to the left of Barack Obama in 2008 on this. I'm like, really? I mean, my joke has always been, look, if gays want to be as miserable in matrimony as straight people,
Yeah.
then that's totally their right. Like, why are we still talking? We have so much bigger fish to fry than this. And, but I remember at the time too, I scoffed at conservatives who would say, well, it's a slippery slope, because soon we're going to be talking about pedophilia and all this other stuff. And, maybe I might censor that out. Sorry.
No, you're good.
But now, I mean, I feel like I'm eating crow in a lot of ways on this, because these are the kind of things that we're talking about now. And it's really weird.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I remember when I was younger, my parents were conservative. I would probably consider them more conservative than I am on a lot of things. And they always told me that it was going to be a slippery slope with all this stuff. And I was like, well, you guys sound like my parents. You sound, like fuddy-duddies. You sound like people who are afraid of progress and change and anything new. And then I'm looking back at it and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that was totally exactly what happened. And they were just kind of seeing the signs because they kept up with the news on a lighter degree than I do now, but they were just kind of generally aware of the trends. They lived through like the 70s and 80s and then through the 90s. And so they'd seen some of this stuff. It's like, oh, well, maybe they really were onto something. So I wanted to ask you, did you want to jump in there?
I did, yeah, because there's also, you mentioned change, right?
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of these people are like, it's change for change's sake. And they have this idea of themselves that they're making progress. And so to them, I think part of the issue is that, and again, you're talking about this sort of postmodern deconstructionist sort of worldview. And so they're breaking down these ideas of sex and gender. And so to them, progress is, it's embracing a society that doesn't see so much in these terms, because only old I love you that you said fuddy-duddies, because I use that term too.
It's a great
but
term.
Only old fuddy-duddies are people who still think in terms of the gender binary and gay and straight and these kinds of things. So to them, they think they're on the vanguard of cultural change. And really, it's funny because, I mean, Thomas Sowell, he gave this interview where he said, nothing is older than the idea that something is new. And these same people are sitting here thinking that they're so progressive in their views on sex and sexuality. It's like, dude, Roman Empire, the Greeks, Weimar Germany, everyone was doing this already.
Yeah.
There's nothing original about what you're doing, but
Nothing
they think
new.
that they think they're revolutionaries, and it's hilarious.
Well, I think it was Seneca who was saying, here comes the old boss, same as the new boss. And Seneca also had another good quote that I think probably applies to progressivism, because every time I look at progressives, they don't seem to know where they're going. Seneca said, if a man does not know to what port he is steering, no wind is favorable to him. And I think that you could probably credit this principle with the reason why a lot of progressives have a lot of anxiety and a lot of anger with the present, because they're constantly striving for change and they don't really seem to know what direction they're trying to go in. They're just trying to change the way it is. They're just trying to destroy things. They're just trying to tear down what is in front of them. And to what end? It seems like they don't even know. And they'll talk about stuff like communism. And these are people who don't even want to do things like order pizza or schedule a dentist appointment. And I'm just like, how's that going to work? I don't see that happening. But what I was going to ask was, I know you don't consider yourself a religious person, but you have observed that Marxism is a form of a religion. Do you think that the loss of some kind of religious underpinning has led to some of these ideas and tendencies that we're seeing now in modernity?
Yeah, I mean, I consider myself pretty staunchly atheist, but I also, and I'm not familiar with Nietzsche, but I know I need to read him. He's like, because my intellectual journey has just begun, right? Because again, I was an actor for so long. You don't have to be smart. I mean, you do have to be smart, but
you have to read a lot, yeah.
But well, like old plays, which is useful in and of itself, which kind of like maybe red pilled me on a casual level, but because you discover that the more that times change, people change, that we haven't really changed that much ultimately. But but I am coming around to this understanding that if people don't have one religion, they're going to glom onto another one. And I think the one of the most um, shining examples of that. I mean, look at someone. So around 2010 or so, that's when I really self-declared as an atheist, right? So I'm like, you know, getting baked and watching like Matt Dillahunty and like Sam Harris,
Mm-hmm.
Sham Harris, and
Yeah.
you know, and Chris Hitchens, who I think was the best of them all, right? Chris Hitchens, you know, Richard Dawkins is God Delusion, and so these are books where I'm like, yeah, that's it. And I thought it was all edgy and kind of cool to be like, huh, you believe in an imaginary sky god? You know, I'm a. What about the flying spaghetti monster? I'm a Pastafarian. And you know, but looking back on it now, I think one thing that kind of changed my mind, or where I knew I'd shifted, is there's a video on YouTube, and it's a debate between, you know, atheists on one side and more conservative religious folks on the other side. And the thing is that on one side it's Chris Hitchens and I want to say Dawkins, maybe Lawrence Krauss as well. And on the other side, I forgot who it was, but one of them was a guy named Roger Scruton, Sir Roger Scruton,
Oh
the late
yeah.
Roger Scruton.
Fantastic.
And I think I just discovered him. He made this wonderful film called Why Beauty Matters. And I was like, wait a minute, I like Roger Scruton. This will be really interesting. And for the first time, it really jumped out at me just how sort of arrogant and how hubristic, how dismissive the atheist side was. And Camille Paglia, I love her so much right now. I just started her
She's
book
great.
Sexual Personae. I'm like, where has this book been all my life? It's been sitting here in this apartment, and I just haven't looked at it. And but I take her position on it, which is that, you know, I'm an atheist, but I respect religion.
Mm.
And what I learned during the pandemic is that all these guys, these people, I mean, Sam Harris, I mean, good Lord.
Oh yeah,
Trump
he's
really
gone.
broke that dude.
Yeah.
But you know, it's to my mind now, I've discovered that it's not enough to have all, you know, to be tech savvy, to have all this technology, to be scientifically literate, to be super intellectual or whatever. It's nice. It's a great trait to have in certain situations. And also we have to make the distinction, as Thomas Sowell does, between people who are smart and people who are merely articulate. But,
Mm.
you know, but it's simply not, it's not enough if you're only narrowing yourself to affairs of the mind or this idea of yourself as a rational being. You're missing a completely different plane of life, and that's where I really began to. And also, you know, honestly, I was having a conversation with, excuse me, offline with Zuby, and he was talking. We talked about art and religion,
Yeah, that's
and
great.
you know, and that really began. And this is sort of how it built on. Discovering Roger Scruton. You know, and I think that there is a linkage. There can be sort of a connection or maybe a parallel drawn between, say, if you see a piece of art that really moves you deeply, and you can't really articulate why or what. I mean, because you don't need, right, an education or an Ivy League degree to know how something makes you feel,
Right.
and to know how something impacts you emotionally or on a spiritual level, even. You know, which is language I wouldn't have used a few years ago. You know, so is there some sort of connection between, you know, a sort of creative awakening and your intuition, your creative intuition, or your regular intuition, and the spirit realm or the religious realm or whatever? And for me, these, you know, all these intellectuals, so to speak, all these sciencey people, all these atheists, they can't explain any of that. They don't have language to explain any of that. They can't grasp any of that. I'm just some dumb actor artist, right? But at the same time, you know, I you know, I mean, I still have a healthy appetite for, you know, philosophy or economics, these kinds of heady subjects. At the same time, though, I still have my foot in this creative realm and this the realm of the emotion. And these scientists, or science-minded people, they don't have those tools. They're not equipped with any of that, and they can't. They can't understand when a religious person says, I had this experience. Now, me as an atheist, I'm like, you know, that's not really me.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I've been on stage where, you know, I've left where I've done a bunch of work, right, and I've prepared myself for the role. And at a certain point, right, it's funny, all the acting schools, you pay all this money, and they say, we're really just trying to teach you to get out of your own way. We can't really teach you anything, but you know, you do all the work and you let it go. And come what may, what happens, you kind of surrender yourself, right, to your own creative faculties, into, your scene partners and the world around you, right? And really, at its highest level, you're operating, in the realm of imagination and creativity and intuition. And to my mind, that's sort of similar to say, you're surrendering all that and on faith that whatever happens is going to be correct and true and authentic and compelling and entertaining, and it's going to be the deepest expression of your inner being. And I think that sort of is akin to a divine kind of religious experience. And this is what these intellectuals just, they don't get it. They can't get it. They don't have the skill set to really wrap their minds around that. And so they dismiss it and they deride it because they don't understand it. So I guess that's a long-winded way to answer your question. Is like, I don't know if a return to like Christianity is the answer, but it seems to me that in its absence, people are really, really struggling. And, for me, I guess the replacement in a way is art and creativity.
Interesting. I like that. And I actually hadn't considered the concept of beauty. I only know that when people talk about science and religion in the same breath, I have to kind of try and stop them and say, science and religion are not trying to explain the same things. They're operating on completely different parallels, right? So religion would be much less objective than science, theoretically, although I feel that we're seeing the rise of subjective science, which is terrible. I saw a study, an article the other day saying that research demands we take polygamy or polyamory more seriously. And I was like, excuse me, the research does not suggest anything. Subjective scientists' feelings about polyamory are trying to encourage us to change how society views it. The science itself just kind of shows us what's there. If it's done correctly, if it's done right, it's showing us what's actually there. How we interpret it, that subjectivism, is something that science can't actually account for. And as someone who's raised in a Christian household, I now consider myself probably more along the lines of an agnostic, in that I don't feel that I'm sufficiently equipped to say whether or not God is real. I feel like I'm not smart enough. I feel like I'm certainly not arrogant enough to say that I know one way or the other. But I do see the difference between countries that have, like, civilizations that have religious underpinnings and strong faith and morals and principles, and how those societies do compared to how Rome did and how we're doing now. And I think probably my most compelling argument for it, and it was really interesting listening to Dennis Prager talk to Jordan Peterson about this, because this was basically his similar argument too, was that the strongest argument for having a faith in a civilization is that it just makes it better. It makes it more sustainable. It makes it lasting. And it emphasizes things like nuclear families, the importance of marriage, and the necessity of like sacrificial behavior by like raising children and participating in church. And these are things that you can't really see in our current modern atomized environment. It seems like we're really lacking a lot of those things, which I think is kind of leading us toward our downfall. So how do you see us kind of recovering from this cultural tailspin? Do you think there's like a simple answer? Probably not, but just in case think there is.
Well, because a simple answer, you're talking about solving people, solving humanity, right?
Yeah,
you can't solve the problem of humanity. We're far too complicated for that. But going back a little bit to this idea of beauty, it's not just beauty. It's also like transcendence, right? And on top of all of that, and there's a wonderful woman named Salome Sibune that turned me on to this word. It's awe, A-W-E, a sense of awe and reverence, which, not only great art can produce, but, but sort of, divine religious experiences can produce the same sort of things. I feel awe when I see the might of nature. It can be terrible, but also awe-inspiring. It can be, you can be washed away in a tsunami, but also, if I look at a mountain range or horizon in upstate New York in the fall, and, I see the all the trees and leaves dappled with red and orange and yellows, and it's so brilliant to look at. And open blue sky, to me, that's a miracle. It's like, that's unbelievable that that looks like that. So I'm in awe by that. I'm in awe of a beautiful Seurat painting or Monet. I'm in awe of Michael Jackson's Thriller. Just the artistry in there. It's
Right.
so. Or if I listen to Maria Callas singing an aria. So there's all kinds of things that that can produce that. And and I think at the end of the day, we're sort of honoring something that's bigger than ourselves, right? Larger than ourselves. And what we're doing right now, I think, as a culture and a society, is we are focusing more and more on these sort of small minutia about our identities and my skin color and my sexuality and my gender and all this other nonsense, which at the end of the day is sort of a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things. I like to think, and this has been my tack on it, is that if we are moving toward a more secular society, then perhaps art and artists can help fill the void that religion has left. Unfortunately, the lion's share, as we referenced at the beginning of this conversation, is that a lot of the artists are responsible for a lot of this division that's being that's and smallness that's being foisted onto the general audience. For me, and it's interesting because I get kind of frustrated with more conservative leaning people, because I do think that they are correct when they talk about the family unit, and we talk about these horrific tragedies where people take firearms and take other people's lives, and almost every single time it's somebody who's been socially alienated and they don't feel like they fit into society, and they came from a broken home. I mean, most of them come from fatherless homes, to be honest with you.
Right.
And so we can pass all these laws we want, but we're not addressing the deeper underlying issues that are causing these problems. So until we begin to look at these things and really address them, then nothing's going to change. But I like to think that art can help create this. Art can heal the soul and the spirit, right? In the absence of religion. And I get kind of frustrated with more conservative leaning people, because I think they don't, again, for reasons that stated before about more practical, pragmatic concerns, they kind of overlook the importance of art and artists and creativity, and they'll focus on economics and law, geopolitics, and these are all important things, but they'll joke about what art doesn't produce anything. Bring me my latte, and but it's weird because at the same time, then they also understand they can understand the abstract benefits of religion, but not the abstract benefits of indulging or engaging your imagination, and how that can heal and bolster a society as well. So I think maybe part of my sort of unstated goal and mission right now is to be sort of an ambassador for the arts, and to say, hey guys, even if you don't want to do it yourself, you can at least give us some money and hire us so that we can we can create stuff. Take the Daily Wire approach, fund people that don't hate you.
Exactly.
Because what I've discovered, which has been really wonderful, is that I have some Shakespeare sonnets pieces on my YouTube channel, and I also have a snippet of me singing some Rodgers and Hammerstein in a recital, or a concert, I should say. And the overwhelming response has been so positive. And what I've learned is that people, they do like this stuff. They want more of it. They want great work from great artists who, I'm not saying that I'm great, but like great artists who don't look down on them.
Right.
And, my favorite comments from the musical piece was, people who were like, people who were like, I love Broadway, but I can't ever go out to see shows. But then I also love people who are like, I have no interest in this whatsoever, but I'll watch more of it if it's you doing it.
Right.
And
it's fun.
And right. And that says to me that, there is an audience, there's a hunger, there's an appetite out there in whatever you want to call it, right? Middle America, the South, flyover country, whatever it is. These people in New York and LA, they don't have a monopoly on culture and
Mm.
sophistication. And like I said before, you don't need an Ivy League degree, to understand how something makes you feel. And so it's been very heartening to see that there are so many people out there who, they want to be, they want to have these sort of transcendent experiences. They want to be awed. They want to be moved, and it's just and there are more artists now who, that I'm sort of, we're a gathering storm. We're figuring this stuff out, and it's part of the reason. Again, we need more right leaning people who are more industrious and more disciplined and enterprising, right? This is what's hilarious, and this is why you need both sides, right? Because for me, all I want to do is just, sing and act and, do creative stuff and draw and write. And I want somebody else to take care of the logistics, right? So if I were to start a company, a movie studio or a theater company, I would have some conservative leaning person running the company to help keep
Yes.
me in line, and
Yes.
like handle the budgets and the scheduling and all that stuff, and let the kids play.
I love
let,
that.
let the kids play, and the grown-ups who are handling the big boy stuff, the big girl stuff, can do that. and
Right.
and and that, as a matter of fact, I go back to Cameron Pasha, and he said that brilliantly. He said, a lot of the motto in Hollywood for a long time was that, say progressive things in public, but do conservative things in private. So say all these things in public, but privately you're making money.
Yeah,
Even
you
on
get
Broadway.
married. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I can't imagine these producers. I mean, and like one quick anecdote, there's a show called Jagged Little Pill, which is based on the Alanis Morissette album of the same name, right? This musical that was on Broadway. And before everything kind of shut down, before the pandemic, this email was sent out, and from some dumb actor who was complaining that they were going to reduce the number of shows to like 6 shows per week, as opposed to 8 shows per week, which means that they were going to be making less money. And they were like, this isn't what we signed up for, and it's not a part of our contract, and yada yada yada. I'm like, well, maybe the producers are more savvy economists and business people than these stupid actors, and they understand that they're going to be playing to reduced capacity houses. And so that's why you need these people, to kind of take charge of stuff and provide an environment where, again, you can kind of let loose, let the kids play and create something really cool. And then you have the more free market right leaning person to help sell it.
Yes. Yes. I
Hello.
love that. 100%. Well, I've always heard it said that a leftist or a liberal will help kickstart a company. They'll have the idea and the creativity. But then if you want to keep that company running, you better have a conservative to keep the books and make sure that
Right.
everybody's on the right track. I think you're entirely correct about making that cultural change. I think that art is a good way to do it. Now, the way we see Hollywood trying to do it, I think is entirely the wrong way. We see that forced representation that nobody really wants to see. We see them trying to shoehorn race changes in where they're not necessary. And they're really just kind of giving people of different backgrounds just a white person's role. How about creating something unique and original and really kind of getting into some of their cultural differences and strengths? No, 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 they can't do that. It has to be exactly the same, just a slightly different skin tone. So narrow, so minimal, such little creativity. And I think one of the things I've been saying is that I know it's going to take a really long time to fix our problems because they have to be solved from the ground up. And I think, based on our conversation, that art is a great way to do that now. If you recall, Andrew Breitbart also said that politics is downstream of culture. And I think that the right is kind of starting to notice that we need to be involved in the arts, even though it's kind of hard for us. We feel maybe a little bit uncomfortable. But what you said, I wanted to circle back and then we can start wrapping this because we should probably close it here in a little bit. This hour has flown by. Great chat. You mentioned that you'd think that conservatives would have this understanding of some of the awe that arises based on their religious background. And that really kind of struck a chord with me because I think you're entirely correct. I think someone needs to go out there and be like, hey, you know what? The reason that people really resonate to some of this art and music and some of this really important stuff that you seem to kind of minimize is because it gives them something that's very similar to a transcendent religious experience. So if you want to tell people more about your religion, you need to just say something like, it's like when you listen to a beautiful piece of music. This is actually a parallel that's drawn in the Bible, which is very interesting. But for whatever reason, conservatives find that very scary. I'm very glad that people are starting to wake up to that a little bit now.
Well, I know why it's scary, because in a lot of these, a lot of great art can be really unsettling, and like as an actor, the great playwright Tony Kushner once said that people are pretty much paying you to suffer.
Hmm.
And the thing is that you as an actor are recreating things or creating the illusion of things that people don't normally experience in their real lives, right? So, I mean, I did a play called Carmen Jones off Broadway, and it's an adaptation of Georges Bizet's opera Carmen. And by the way, this was a what, a 1940s piece where they took this classic French story, or this French story, and they made it an all black cast, and they set it in America, in the American South, in 1947, which is really interesting. And this was before, this was before all the kind of ridiculous race swapping you see now, but at the time it was actually progressive for Oscar Hammerstein to do this, right?
Yeah.
And to be fair, the piece it's kind of dated in some ways, and I think Hammerstein has a sort of racist view of blacks, and that kind of works its way into the piece itself. But that was back when that sort of progressivism was daring and actually needed, right? But I play this role where this officer falls in love with this dangerous woman, and and it was funny because initially, and everyone should read the original novella called Carmen by Prosper Mérimée. You can read it in a weekend. It's a brilliant, brilliant story. And there's so much sex and danger and violence. And this goes back into like what people are scared about. And by the way, Carmen is a strong female character. She's an unbelievable character, and it's just wonderful. But when you're dealing with like for me, I approached the role, I interpreted it as someone who people might say he was obsessed or he was driven crazy. The character's name was Joe, where Joe was crazy. But I said, no, he's in love. He's in love with this woman. And he's never experienced this kind of love before, because it's not only like he has a sweetheart back home, right? Who sort of represents constancy and goodness and whatever. But then there's Carmen, who's in this, red dress. And she's buxom and she's voluptuous and she's sexy and she ignites all these feelings in him and all of us, right? These sort of deep, in our fourth chakra, that this really strong, raw, powerful sexual energy that's really, really scary if left unchecked, right? And I think what happens to Joe was that he becomes seduced by that, and it corrupts him. And at the end of the play, he kills her because he can't do anything else. He can't do anything else because he has to kill her in order to free himself. And it's really hard, I think, for people who live a more, who are more, used to stoicism, who are more sort of,
Sedate.
again, sedate or pragmatic, or, who live in, sort of boxes where, and I'm trying not to be condescending about it. I realize it might sound like that, but in normal everyday life, normal everyday people don't really go through this kind of stuff.
Right.
But we still have those impulses inside of us. That's the thing. And it's sort of cathartic in a way when you can go and, read a novel or, watch a play or a movie, and you have these kinds of impulses, which are, they're I won't say they're cleansed from you in a way, but you get to see that reflected back to you. And I think it can be scary for people to kind of visit the sort of darker aspects of our humanity sometimes. And but even the most joyous stories are have darkness to them. I mean, like one of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. And even though the end of the film makes me ugly cry all the time, and it's just sort of it's really exuberant, at the same time, in the first 10 minutes of the film, it features this shopkeeper whose son has died. And the shopkeeper, is depressed. I mean, it's really, really a moving scene. It's really difficult to watch because this guy is in so much pain. And the film hinges on this visitation from a guardian angel. And why does a guardian angel come down? Because the Jimmy Stewart character is going to end himself. So there's always these sort of dark underpinnings against, even the brighter stories. And and that's the duality of man, isn't it? The yin and the yang. It's the darkness and the light and all that stuff. And if you're only paying attention to economics and law and policy and holding down a job and all the practical things in life, then you're totally you're missing out on, and maybe even bottling up, all these other impulses, right? And that's why we used to make fun of, right, all those family values, sort of homophobic Republicans, and then they get caught trying to solicit for sex in like a bathroom,
it's bottled up. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you got to let your freak flag fly, and sometimes, and if you're too caged and contained, I mean, it's going to work its way out somewhere. But why not just visit those things? Live it out, whatever fantasy or whatever darkness you have, in the theater, or in art, or through music or something, and that's what we can do. That's what artists can do. The power that artists have that other people don't.
Clifton, fantastic chat. I truly enjoyed it. This is not something I think a lot about, but now that I'm thinking about it, you've got the wheels turning in my head. This reminds me so much of what Jordan Peterson talks about, where we send out these little versions of ourselves into the universe just to see what happens to them. And I think that art is probably one of the greatest ways you can do that. That would probably keep some of these Republican senators from doing all these unmentionable things, right? If you actually engage with theater and you're like, oh, this is what it would look like if I did this. There could be really bad ramifications. It might be great for a minute, but I'd have to really think about what I'm doing. When we deny ourselves that, I think that really lessens our life experience. So I'm so optimistic that you are kind of bringing this into the conservative world and kind of opening people's eyes to it. I think this is a huge part of the cultural change we need. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation of this kind of culture, art, music, theater to my audience. I know that I really enjoyed it. Where can people find you?
Well, thanks for having me, Lydia. I do appreciate it. I can be found on Twitter at Clifton A. Duncan. I call myself a mediocre Twitter personality, but it hasn't seemed to stop my following from growing. I'm also on YouTube at Clifton Duncan. I have the Clifton Duncan podcast that's going there now, and it's just it keeps rolling along somehow, like a was it Old Man River. It just keeps on rolling along, and we have some wonderful guests on there. And kind of going back really quickly to what I was saying before, I mean, one of the most popular conversations for a while, I talked to Victor Davis Hanson for about half an hour, and we talked about the importance of Greek tragedy and classical Greek literature.
Very
and people
cool.
really they loved it. Or Douglas Murray is another one that I had on. And again, we talked about art. Both of these men are often called upon to talk about politics. But talking about art, people really enjoyed it because they never get to see that kind of stuff. So that's sort of my thing. My tagline for it is that they're conversations with fascinating people that exist at the nexus of art, entertainment, culture, and society. And so that's sort of my thing right now. So you can find it there on Spotify, on YouTube, and just now on Apple Podcasts as well. I finally got it out there. So,
Nice.
That's where you can find me at. Oh, also I have a Substack, which I'll begin to write as well, called The State of the Arts. So the play on state as well as in there as well. So a lot of stuff happening. I'm going to be very, very, very busy.
That's great. You're doing great things. You have a very well-deserved Twitter following. I think that you're going to accomplish great things moving forward. Thank you so much for joining us, Clifton. Thank you to all of my audience, and for all of the rest of you, I will see you all next time. how's it going?